I'm going to ask Ken to come up and have the last word. The father of the whole day. Ken, more grey hairs on you than you started with. Actually, not many more because there aren't many there in the first place. But Ken, come up and summarise the day.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Evan. I want to say a few more things about you in a second, but thank you for the introduction. When we started out just after lunch today, I do the parallel or the analogy with being a parent and what was happening today. And I said that the distance between conception and when one's children have grown up and become adults is enormous, and you don't really link the two. I'm beginning to see, though, some genetic links back to the big idea we had when we sat around the Lord Mayor's appeal table 18 months ago, and out of which came today's event. I should say that yesterday I spent a very happy day with my children, actually our children, because my wife was equally involved in their upbringing, possibly even more than I was, and our grandchildren. So I've got my point about the DNA continuation. And I would say that when we had the first Lord Mayor's Appeal committee meeting, which wasn't the group that put this together, but the higher one that did all the other events, we were talking about various things that needed to happen around the city during the course of the year. And I was so honoured to have been invited to sit on this committee. I hadn't really thought about what we might do. And as we were going around the table describing the big ideas people had, I remember the first one was to have an evening of Chablis wine drinking and have the Lord Mayor become a Chablisienne, which is quite an important thing in Chablis. I suddenly thought, actually, I better have an idea. I was so proud to be invited to the top table, I hadn't really thought about the next step. So as the train wreck of this discussion going around the table got closer to me, I thought, you know what? It's now or never. There's something that I've thought for a long time was missing in the city, and I think I can marry these two objectives together. Objective one is to raise money for the Lord Mayor's Appeal, which is why we were all around the table. And objective two, my objective, was to have a network of networks, an affinity group of affinity groups to break down the barriers that we spoke about. So I stole the energy of the thing that was happening and piped up with this jolly good idea, which was we try and get a couple of hundred people together, paying on average £1,000 each, together in Mansion House or Guildhall, and we would produce a manifesto for change in the talent agenda in the city. And everybody went, well, that's, here, damn good idea, fine. And we went on to the next person who had an idea about Burgundy or Claret or whatever the next thing was. And then I thought, now I've got to do this, and I got together a small group of people that I knew. Now, those of you who remember one of the objections earlier on today is how do you get started, or you go to your Rolodex and you get people who are quite like you. Well, I'm very proud to say that my Rolodex is full of people who aren't a bit like me, and they're all here. And I just like my committee who are here just to stand up so that everybody can see those who've made today so wonderful. So you all know who you are. Couldn't they, starting with just get up on your feet. This isn't so difficult. Thank you. Arun, brilliant. Richard, you're there. And Richard P. is and Drew standing at the back. Thank you. Now, thank you. I can tell you it would be harder to imagine a more diverse group of people. We have a common councillor, we've got the head of the insurance business for Lloyds, we've got a senior lawyer, we've got the creative head of Instinctive. We had a fantastically diverse group. And what happened was, and here's the serious point, that idea that I began to sketch out around the table has turned into this today, which I think is proof positive of our collective point about if we get people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, and a common objective, we can be massively creative in solving problems. But this is a British event, and I've been British all of my life, so I know what happens with most people. You now think, yeah, whoopee, but what next? So let's just talk about the what next. Well, the first big what next is as a result of this whole event and the generous donations that have come in from you who bought tickets and those of you who sponsored us, we've raised just shy of £100,000 of cash for the Lord Mayor's Appeal. And Instinctive and Crystal Interactive, who've done all the great work to make today happen, have given us over £100,000 worth of in-kind support to make all this come together. And we have many thousands of pounds worth of drinks coming, about which more in a second. So we have made a major contribution to the Lord Mayor's Appeal, and you'll all know about the 4 charities that she is supporting. Now, for me, that was symbolically very important as well, that this enormously diverse group of people with an event which is trying to improve the agenda in the city has also made a big, non-selfish impact on what's happening to the Lord Mayor's Appeal. So we're helping ill people, disadvantaged children, and the other two charities in the Lord Mayor's Appeal. And so thank you for that support and your companies that made this possible. So what next? Well, the what next is, the ideas, as Evan has said, will be turned into a manifesto. Because I hope to continue to chair this a little bit longer, I will insert the "we demand that" in front of those first 8 things, so that it's understood by the establishment that this isn't just a to-do list from an action meeting. It's actually something that will be holding the establishment up to account throughout the next year, and the handover between Lord Mayor 1, Fiona, and the next Lord Mayor. I was particularly delighted when Fiona said, and don't think, Ken, that when I finish my year I'm going away, I'm going to keep this agenda going. So we've got an ambassador to keep this alive for a very long period of time. So the what next is you will see this published. You'll see it published in the media, and you'll see it published on the legacy website from Audacity Talent Rising, notification of which you will all get when we've worked out how we're going to do that, but the details will be done. And hopefully you will then be able to stay in touch with each other as this affinity group of affinity groups, and we'll build a cohort of people who understand the arguments, understand the issues, can help drive this change to where it needs to go. Now, I told the story about sitting around the table and realizing I had an opportunity, and if I grabbed it, I could make a big difference around the Lord Mayor's Appeal. I think that's the metaphor, that's the message for today. Those of you, and I think that's everybody who's stayed for the afternoon, who isn't a victim but wants to be a victor, it's all about how do we seize the opportunities and take advantage of them for the greater good, not just for ourselves. Because this isn't about me getting up the ladder, it's about talent rising inside the city to help our competitiveness. And the last sponsor that I want to talk about is the one who very generously has given us the wine for this evening. It's actually being sponsored by a new wine importer in the UK called Glass Half Full Wines, and their details will be downstairs in the crypt when we go down there. But the wine that they've chosen to showcase and to donate this evening comes from Women in Wine. Women in Wine, for me, is the quintessential story of talent rising. Back in 2006, a group of 20 professional black women in South Africa, with an interest, each of them had an interest in wine, decided that instead of the wine industry being owned and controlled as it had been by those who'd owned and controlled it forever, it was time that black people and women took back one of the assets in their nation. And they created the Wine in Women Cooperative. But it wasn't about them making money themselves out of wine. It was about creating a business, a cooperative, which would give opportunities for education and employment and greater enlightenment to people in South Africa. Now, those of you who know anything about South Africa will know there are all kinds of issues with migrant labor and so on. And the intention here was to bring people into the vineyards who had, in essence, been slave labor in a previous generation and be allowed not only to work in a business that they could be part of, but have a part of the business. So the Women in Wine Cooperative, in essence, has the workers owning shares in the business. So they're getting education, training, experience, and equity in their activities. And this is a group of people, the 20, who 30 years ago were third-class citizens in their own country. So when we talk about talent rising, I think it's very hard to imagine a more dramatic example of that happening in our lifetime. And of course, we're grateful to them not just for the fact that they are a great example, but they've also donated a couple of 100 bottles of wine. And so all it requires me to do now, before you rush downstairs to the crypt and avail yourself of the fruits of their labors, is ask you all to join in a big round of applause for our MC of the day, who has magically, I have to say, managed to move through all the ups and the downs of the technology and us and the whims and the instructions, keeping us largely on time, I think I've just blown it, and turning us into a point where we've now got something we can take away, add, we demand that, and nail it to the Mansion House door, albeit with double-sided tape because it's a listed building. So join me, please, in thanking Evan for everything you've done. Evan, thank you. And you need to know that Evan has given his time freely today, and we should be adding that to our list of the size of the donation. And with that, to the crypt, to the crypt.